it's time for us to begin this morning. So if you'll get out your maps, your Bibles, your brains, get the synapses firing as we kind of continue through our frameworking. Before we get into our study for this morning, though, let's take a moment and begin our time together in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the blessing that it is to gather together in safety and in warmth, and we hope that our study and worship today is a pleasing activity to you. We hope that for us, we better understand you and your people, and that our ability to walk in Christ matures effectively each day. Please forgive us of our sins, and we offer this prayer in your Son's name. Amen. All right, so we are, as already noted, back into our map work. You should still be using for this conversation and study today map number 1. That's the map we've been working on. After that, what we need to be thinking forward to is the next map. It's either in the books if you have one of those, or the information sheets up here. We'll give it to you after class. And so it's got both the finished map, your map to work on, and the next step of instructions. I think it's important also this morning to kind of just have a quick what's going on next. It's obviously laid out for the most part in your syllabus that had our whole course list laid out. You can look at that. If that's too much information at once for you, here it is. This week we're going to finish out map number 1. That's our first map. Major map that we'll use out the rest of our historical overview. Next week, we're going to do 2 things. We're going to have a collaborative review. So that means you're going to be assigned into small groups here in the class, and you guys get to work together for a little bit and do your group best to make a map without using your notes. By doing it as a group, it accomplishes 2 things. Somebody in your group will know what you do not know. Secondly, it should lower the stress threshold of trying to remember everything by having a little group activity. And I think it will also foster a good learning environment for us. So what will probably happen is you're going to get a message from me between now and next week and say you are in group number, or you can think about it this way. It's basically going to be kind of broken up by where you sit. And so one way or the other, you're going to have some teamwork activity, some team building skills. The week after that, we'll be moving into our next map. So we'll have our collaborative review, and we're going to go ahead and write into our new map, which is map number 2. In your workbook, I believe it's lesson number 6, and start zooming out a little bit. We've been looking at the smaller segment of Palestine. We're going to zoom out to a look that's more about this larger ancient world space, so we can make these connections to a number of the larger sections of the Bible story. And so that will be happening as part of next week's class. And so we'll have that review. We'll have an introduction of the next section. After that, we'll be filling out that map. Once we get these 2 major maps done, map number 1, map number 2, which we will continue to use and maybe even revisit in different ways throughout the course of the study, we're going to go, in essence, a bit to Genesis and start building a historical overview of all the Bible books, of all of biblical history, and try to do a timelined history and geography study of the Bible. So what you've been doing these first couple weeks is trying to build the basic framework for the rest of the studies for this year, and maybe it's interacted with your prior Bible study where you've said, hey, I didn't know where this was, or I didn't know what that looked like, or I didn't have a connection to these physical features. Well, we're going to keep going back to that to try to build that knowledge base better and expand our appreciation for a lot of these segments and studies. All right, so that's our next 2 things. Review, introduce the big map, and start working on that. Okay, so for today, again, we're back in the little land of Palestine. We're going to take a little bit more time to go in depth to the Jordan Valley area. The Jordan Valley, or the Jordan Rift, if you will, is that center section that goes through Palestine or Israel. Remember last week we identified the 4 big sections, right? And you probably did one of 2 ways, possibly to mark that on your map. You may have made a key out in your big water space. By the way, what's the name of that big water next to Palestine? What's one of the 3 names we use for it? Mediterranean. Most popular modern use is the Mediterranean. What are the 2 ways it's identified in the Bible, Hebrew Bible, New Testament text? The sea, right. And sometimes they get all a little extra with it and they call it the Great Sea. That's the second one that's sometimes said. So either we can use Mediterranean, perfectly fine to call it that. For our purposes, we can also say it's the sea. Or sometimes they say it's the Great Sea. Your translation might also have a few other variations, but those are the most common ways that it's referred to. So you may have put your key of those 4 areas out there, and then you on your map, just like we have here, you would have had 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is 3. The Jordan Rift is a section of Israel that has high peak ridges, offset a little bit in a couple different ways, that carve down through Canaan, the promised land. Israel, or the broader region, eventually is referred to as Palestine. And that carving space creates some unique geology and geography that we're going to identify both in the map, and I got some pictures to kind of show parts of it for us today. You may have also noticed that the height of these various mountain sections comes into play too. So if we start thinking about it, this section here that we'll talk about in more detail this morning has a higher elevation, but it's a consistent elevation than much of section number 2 that we talked about last week. And also, as you go more north, this area right here is substantially elevated than the lower sections. Right now, this week, on the northern part of Israel, it's snowing and creating all of the primary water source that will eventually flow down first into the Hula Valley, Lake Hula, then it will go through the tributaries to the Sea of Galilee, and then it will finally end up into the Dead Sea. A couple times I've mentioned this song. Next week we'll probably pay attention to it just very briefly. It's entitled There Is a Sea. If you've never looked it up before, I encourage you to do so. The lyrics actually talk about the relationship between Lake Hula and Galilee as they feed into the Dead Sea and connect some of the spiritual concepts that would tie into that. So the song's entitled There Is a Sea. It's a pretty good option of things to think about. So looking at what we have here, this section here begins all the way up on the northeastern shores of the Mediterranean or the Great Sea, and extends down to the Jordan through Palestine, Araba, and the Gulf space, even into Eastern Africa. And so the section we're looking at actually continues to carve all the way down through into sections of the lower parts of that Gulf area. The Sinai Peninsula we might think about, and then even into the edge of Africa. And so this is just a segment of that larger section. The overall space of it is 4,000 miles. And so the reason I bring that up is to give us some context of dimensions. Remember, Israel, 1/4 the size approximately of Georgia. That's approximately tip to stern there, the whole spacing that way. About 150 miles, 120 miles. And so very small part of the globe is represented in that spot. That section is sometimes referred to in the middle spot of it as the El Gore. That's the spot from the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea. A large number of the river stories of the Bible take place right there on the Jordan. And the Jordan River in this spot, from south of the Sea of Galilee or Lake Kinneret is not exactly what you would expect it to be because it gradually shifts in water quality. The section north of it, where Dan is located, is a far more pristine and clean section of river space. The valley itself is, again, really narrow, 2 to 15 miles. Cliffs make up either side. I should have some pretty good photos to show you what we mean by cliffs and scale, some aerial imagery to look at that in a minute. Jordan River itself, 11 miles, takes place from your map. That's Lake Hula. It's also referred to as a Hula Valley. That area, if you're thinking about what Lake Hula looks like, it looks a lot like you may have seen photos of, and we'll see maybe a few of them again today, of some of the crater lakes on the western part of the U.S., where it is a lake surrounded very sharply by sometimes very barren-looking mountain shapes. Or it kind of also looks a lot like you think of some of the Alps do in the summers. The weather system's a little different because of its location on the globe, but it looks kind of like that. Again, there's that 11-mile space from Lake Hula to the Sea of Galilee. In that period, it drops 900 feet. So 11 miles, 900 feet. That's actually pretty going. And so you get on that river, that means the pace of the river is going to be moving pretty quickly. Actually, it's kind of similar to the pacing you're going to find on the Chattahoochee River. It actually moves pretty good. We don't notice it because Chattahoochee is not a very turbulent, rock-filled river right around us. But you get your boat on it, it's moving. It actually might be faster than the Chattahoochee a little bit. When it gets below the Sea of Galilee and it's going from there to the Dead Sea, it slows down a lot. A lot of the things change about it because of that. That's 600 feet to go 65 miles in distance that way, but the river itself is not 65 miles long. It's 200 miles long. And so it travels 65 miles as the crow flies, but it drives 200 miles to make it. So that makes it even slower as it moves in that bottom section. The riverbed there will vary from 80 to 180 feet, average depth, or excuse me, the width, that is, average depth about 5 or 12 feet. The Jordan Valley itself, that's that middle section that's from the Sea of Galilee to the top of the Dead Sea, is about 14 miles. And when we read through the biblical accounts, it was during flood season, that means the water level is up, when the Israelites would have crossed from our eastern section of the map around Jericho into the proper section of the land of Canaan. All right, so a couple of photos to kind of put some context for you. Back on our very tippy top of the map. This is going to be up on your map where you've got Dan labeled. This is one of the headwaters of the Jordan River. So the Jordan River at its northernmost part looks like that. That river there looks pretty nice, right? Kind of flowing, it's moving. It'll push you around if you got into it. If you are living in Israel today, it's up in that section where they do the canoeing, the kayaking activities, just like we would do here. Looks like North Georgia would be. And the water itself is very clear, especially in these upper sections. A lot of those areas, the water is incredibly pristine. But as you go down, the water slows down. And so this is still northern area, but the water pacing has shifted. Multiple tributaries have started to come into it. And so now we're north of the Sea of Galilee at this spot. We're looking at this river space here. And this kind of shows us again our whole Sea of Galilee. We'll talk about this in a little bit more detail as well as we look at some of these photos. This is kind of giving you a look of things. Remember, the Sea of Galilee itself is not a very big spot either. You can stand on the coastline, the western coastline, and see the eastern coastline of the Sea of Galilee on a good day. So we're not talking about a majorly distant shore. That makes Lake Hula on your map even smaller. Lake Hula, you can see the entire lake all at once from an elevated cafe spot. So they have a lot of restaurants up there that you can go look and see. Before we break out here, we're going to stop here and do a lot more of the visual stuff. Do you guys have any questions about your maps? Things that you've been struggling with them? I know a few have been talking about one of the challenges that I share, which is my penmanship is not so amazing as to create little tiny letters. And so I have two or three solutions that I use to that. Number one, to make my words straight, I use a ruler. So when I'm writing on the map, I have a little ruler underneath where I'm writing. That actually helps me. I mean, I help you, it helps me. But the other thing I do is what a lot of cartographers will do. And if I got a lot of places in a little spot, I just draw a line and a circle where it should be, draw the line out and a line underneath it, and write the name of the thing on top of my lines. So I can squeeze more things in a small spot and use a line or an arrow saying, it's right here. This is the spot. Which is perfectly fine to do if you struggle with that. I can't write small enough. Even with wearing my reading glasses, I can't get my words tiny enough to match some of the scale of the map. Anything else that you've had with your map work or things that haven't made sense? All right. Here's this area here. We're talking right now in our valley lookover space. This right here is the section that goes, we're going to talk a little photos and look at the space that goes from Lake Hula to about the bottom right now of the Sea of Galilee. We'll talk about the Jordan River below that too in a second. So this right here is the Jordan River where it joins together and is created by the Dan, the Banias, and the Sinir sources. So at the top of Lake Hula, and the areas around it, you can think of the top of the Jordan River as like a hand that's stretched out. And it's pulling its water from all those sources, to quote from the song, "The Sea, There Is a Sea," day by day. It draws its water from those locations. As we go a little further, it starts to widen out. And so this helps us picture some of these crossing locations. Over the years, I've heard individuals, when I've talked to them about the Bible, they say, crossing a river, what's a big deal about that for a bunch of people? We could totally just swim across that river, right? Remember, to cross a river as a community with all your possessions and your goods, it's not an easy thing. And the story I usually say was, you guys remember the story of all the folks moving across the United States from the West? And how many of times they would lose their wagons in the waters, and people would just suffer. It's a way to connect between stories that they seem to take more seriously, from the westward expansion of the U.S. to the one they're doubting, which is the Bible story. You say, there's a lot of similarity there. It's not as easy as you would think to get all your stuff across a river. And as that river gets wider and deeper, it's more and more challenging. And so showing this is what the river looks like, you have scale to think about. Even more so, this is what the Jordan River north of the Sea of Galilee looks like. And so if you are kind of hovering over the top of the Sea of Galilee and looking up the tributary space, this is what it looks like. This is one of the many reasons why I think this area reminds me a lot of the rolling hills of Western America, California, in that northern space, because it looks a lot the same. So if you've ever been out to Yosemite, kind of looks like this till you get to Yosemite. Hills covered with grass, and it's brown until it rains. That's what Yosemite's adjacent spaces look like. Also looks a little bit similar to sections of eastern Oregon and eastern Washington during the year as well, although there's a little bit more elevation change in some of those areas. This here is the Jordan River, north of the Sea of Galilee, from the north kind of looking at it. So you're now looking down toward the Sea of Galilee. Another way kind of thinking about how these things looks, This is one of the dry days and drier sections, but when the rains come, changes a lot, right? This looks pretty cool. I can go hang out there. You could graze your animals there, graze your crops. It's more inviting than it is during the other seasons. Another look of it. Something you'll also note throughout all of Israel, this small little section, particularly in that same little geographic zone, but Israel in particular, olive trees have become a protected species. In various communities in the U.S., it's actually against the law to remove a certain type of plant in your area, right? And I think in some cities, you have to get a permit to take down trees. Does that match your experiences, right? So in Israel, every single substantial olive tree is a registered tree. And in order to move it, because they prefer you move it, not take it down, you have to file with the state to move that limited resource because they're that important to them. Olive trees, which represents a lot of their concept of whom they are and their culture and their history, big deal. They're not very common anymore due to a variety of reasons. And so, something to think about, the reason I bring that up, some of this is changed a little bit from the time of the biblical stories. Different plants would have been in larger abundance, olive trees being one of them. They are in a lesser quantity than before. Here's another look at it. These are all shots from north of the Sea of Galilee, paying attention to the Jordan River and the way we think about it. You can see that this, as it's up higher, it's more like a moving river in, again, the northern parts of the mountain regions around Georgia, so the pacing is faster. This shot right here shows a class 3.5 rapid section for those who are familiar with river systems. So that means at class 3, it becomes dangerous for individuals to really go down without skill. Class 2, class 1 rapids, you could go down that in your paddle craft, your duckies, pretty okay for the most part. But at class 3, technical skills come into play. And so you want to be able to paddle, learn to eddy, ferry, all that stuff that boaters would understand and use. Again, you can kind of see some additional shots of this, looking at different spots and spaces in different angles and ways. A little closer of some of those rapid sections. And then we saw this one earlier. Let me see if I can scooch forward. I wanted to take a look at one more shot from this part of the river. Here's a close-up of those rapid sections. But as we start getting more and more to the south and things start widening out, we begin to see that everything changes and the type of lifestyle is going to change too as it flattens out the land around it. This is here as it begins to get really close to the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee. So this is the river system as we're coming into it. And in fact, right here is the last bits of this part of the Jordan as it enters into the sea. Visually, if you didn't catch it, that looks kind of similar to the delta space around Egypt as the Nile enters, because that's how they all function on river hydrology. And we'll see that in a second when we get the whole picture up there. All right, so that kind of gives you what we've mapped out, what it kind of looks like. A lot of these pictures and some other ones will come up as we go back to these Bible stories. So we can say, this is what it kind of looks like, and maybe even would have looked like exactly at the time those events occurred. And we should have some additional shots that will show us kind of what the water system looks around Jericho as well, which is one of our first major interactions with that land. All right, so next little part of the Jordan Valley area is the Dead Sea. Dead Sea itself is 45 miles long. Remember, the sea that comes into it, 65 miles distance of Jordan River length from Galilee to the Dead Sea, 200 miles of river system. So the Dead Sea then is now 45 miles. And so it covers up, a good chunk equivalent space, but things change a lot. The primary factors that make the Dead Sea different are going to come into play here. Number one, it's deeper than everything else around it. So this river is already, Jordan River past Sea of Galilee is already below sea level. And so it's already negative from the height of the sea, but then it goes into the Dead Sea, which is even deeper than below sea level. Secondly, because of the temperature of the area, it simply does not sustain and have the ability to give its water out. There's nowhere for it to go. There's no release for it. So you would think you have water going into it every day. It should overfill and fill up, right? Because if I have a cup and I keep pouring my water into it and don't pay attention to what I'm doing, what happens? Spills over. So where's all that water going?
Evaporation.
It's evaporating, right? It's evaporating from two primary reasons. Number one is temperature. Number two is pressure. How many of you have ever tried or successfully swam to the bottom of the swimming pool and touched that drain down there because you lost your goggles and had to go rescue them? Right? You ever feel that pressure on you as you get down deeper and deeper? And you're like, oh, this is so horrible. Well, that's water pressure, right? And as more and more water is above you, and water, how much does a gallon of water weigh? About 8 pounds, right? So if you put 10, let's do it even better, 100 gallons of water straight above your head, how much weight is on your head? 800 pounds of pressure, right? That's kind of how water pressure functions. So the more water is stacked up, the more pressure is down low. Does air weigh anything? Yeah. It's a thing, right? Can I have a pound of air and a pound of water? Right. It's just going to take a whole lot more air. In the middle, I can have a pound of feathers, right? But if I could capture and weigh a pound of air, a lot of volume, a pound of feathers, and a pound of water, they all now weigh the same. If you stack 800 pounds of air above my head, that's 800 pounds of air pressure, right? This is a very simplified science explanation, so there's other factors going on. Or a pound of feathers above my head, or a pound of water, 800 pounds of water, it's the same amount of pressure, right? Well, the closer you get to the earth, the more intense those feelings and effect of the structure of the universe and the earth as it functions behave. So the deeper you are, the higher the pressure you are. And so you have air pressure above you, then water now down lower. So the high amount of pressure on this water source and an environment where the temperature is ripe for evaporation, those two things together accelerate the rate of evaporation for the Dead Sea to such a high rate that it takes up every drop that they send into it. And because of the needs of the community, they're pulling water off as well. So the Dead Sea is actually dropping now. In the time of our Bible accounts, it was a little bit higher and it was stable. Enough water came in, but approximately the water level just varied a little bit, but evaporated all of it that went down in there. And so we're looking at a sea space that is quite substantial in the topography of the region. If you're standing on the edge of the Dead Sea and you're looking at it, you are already 1,300 feet or so below sea level. So if you've been on the beach in Florida, you know you're 1,300 feet or so higher than anybody who's standing at the Dead Sea right then. But then it also then goes another 1,300 feet below that to its deepest point. So again, it's a pretty unique feature there. It takes in about 6.5 million tons of water coming into it every day. Nothing flows out of it because it's all below it. And so it's just taking more and more. And 25% of that water is a solid of some kind. You probably have heard of or seen people saying, hey, this is mud or skincare products with Dead Sea minerals in it. And the interesting thing is, if you live in Europe, your health care at times, and there are some insurance programs that will pay for you to travel to Israel, to go to the Dead Sea to take care of your medical conditions and to go slather up in their mud because of their appreciation for how those minerals might help with your skin conditions. So some skin conditions are treated with that highly dense mud substance that is built there.
What are they using that water for? You said they use it, but what are they using it for?
For this, it's medical uses, and they use it as a tourist attraction. The water in the Dead Sea is only used for those two things. They try to make a desalination plant for it to get salt out for drinking. They do that some too, but the salt that you buy that says it's Dead Sea salt, most of it's not from the Dead Sea. They've just branded it as Dead Sea salt and throw some of the minerals from that in. Les?
I would think that the water that is taken out would be mostly taken out of the tributaries before they get to the Dead Sea, because the salt content is so high that you couldn't use it for any real purpose.
Yeah, they're pulling all the water from the tributaries for their agricultural programs before the Dead Sea space. That's why it's, for irrigation mostly, that's why it's dropping so much faster. So it already had an equilibrium for evaporation, but if you don't put enough water in, then it starts evaporating at a higher rate. They're constantly trying to figure out how to both provide for their communities with the water they need and no longer kill the Dead Sea, because they don't want to kill the Dead Sea, although it's kind of weird because it is the Dead Sea and they want to kill it. All right. Good. Below the Dead Sea space, we've got in the Jordan Valley, another kind of valley space even below that. It exists in a barren and rugged state. Your maps sometimes show it as part of that green land, but really there's not a lot of development or agricultural possible there. All right, so this is a quick little pre-test. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but right now, looking at this map, can you find the Jordan River? Should be able to do that, right? What about Lake Hula? You look at that. I think I kind of, yep, up top. Yep. Sea of Galilee should be a pretty good one. We spent a lot of time figuring out where that is. And then we should also be able to identify the Dead Sea, right? We kind of know where that is. Those 4 water sources generate a connection point for a number of the biblical stories, particularly the Sea of Galilee when we're talking about the work of Jesus. And then the Jordan River becomes substantial when we think about the work of the conquest and development of Israel as a kingdom. And so knowing where that is gives you a relativity point. You can say, oh, this is near the Jordan River. It's near the Sea of Galilee. Going into it, and these sometimes appear in your Bible stories, the Yarmuk River. Guys kind of figure out where that is? So it's up there on the first one. What about the Jabbok? This is one where if you figure out the system, you can figure out where the next major river is, right? So the first one is the Yarmuk. Then the next one is the Jabbok that's coming down. That brings us to the Arnon, below the Dead Sea. We got one more. So, James, what do we come up with as our a little short teaching tool for that? Remember? YJAZ, right? WJAZ to kind of remember out their order. YJAZ exists on the east side of the Jordan. Why does it exist over there? We don't know, but that's where the rivers lay out. Cecilia?
Is the Sea of Galilee, is that salt water?
No, it's not. None of those are salt, but they pick up salt due to the mineral content of the mountain space in the Dead Sea. Fresh water flows in, and because there's so much salt in that other river or water space down in the Dead Sea, it becomes salt water. And actually at the river terminus of the Jordan River it's mixed. And so the farther north you go, the saline count drops very quickly. If it's a drought, the Jordan River incrementally gets more salty. And when there's a period of high rains, the Jordan River is less salty. Much like many of the rivers that exist in America. Is the Mississippi River a salt river? But does it become salty eventually?
Yes, when it hits the Gulf.
When it hits the Gulf, and think about this. Nearly every major river in the United States eventually becomes part of the mighty Mississippi. And you know what else feeds those rivers? The Great Lakes. So the Great Lakes, like the Sea of Galilee and Lake Hula, flow all into the Mississippi tributary system across all of the United States, and eventually, like a giant tree, form themselves completely down into the Gulf and join the salt water that's in the ocean.
Does the water flow north to south?
Nope. It flows north to south, yes. But remember, it's north to south, flowing down. So everything flows into the Dead Sea in this area. So you can think about it as this is Israel's valley space. The Dead Sea is my arm down here. And these are all the rivers that are flowing into it. Even though they might crisscross in some way, they're all incrementally going down. And that rift actually continues down a little bit into, again, the parts of lower Europa there. The Gulf Sea eventually comes into play, Sinai Peninsula, but the height goes up a little bit before it goes back down again. Because this is just a big scar carved into that spot. And then we have the Araba region at the end. Last thing of note, we've got about 10 minutes to pull this all off, is this plateau space that I'm going to drop a bunch of broad information. But you'll see here, in this picture right here, before we get into the trade routes, this last section, big plateau. Most of that area right here is pretty flat, and you're going to look, once you get up to the peaks, you're going to look down into Palestine from that spot. Reminder of our trade routes, the Way of the Sea, that's an easy one to find, right? Way of Shur, where's that going to be? I'm sure it's in there somewhere. I think it's between a couple of things.
Through the middle and up through Jerusalem, up that way.
Yeah, it's just kind of placed in the middle. And then the main one that's there, King's Highway. All of those, to a different degree, now represent the roadways that go through the region. So if you drive, you will probably be driving on one of those routes. Alan and I drove on the King's Highway. It did not feel like the King's Highway when we were there. Those roads in Jordan, picture what a airport's landing and takeoff areas look, where the planes depart, but now erase all the lines. There's no road lines, and you just kind of decide how many cars go abreast in each direction. That's what the King's Highway looks like through Jordan. It's just like everyone's on this side, and we just kind of go where we want. And everyone's on that side, and they kind of go with their line. Is there one spot, two spot, 5 spots? It's how many cars they can fit. That's how the lanes function through a lot of Jordan. And it's still functioning that way. And all these roads follow these same routes. So it's that way during the time of Moses, roughly. It's that way during the time of Christ, roughly. And it's still in those same general lines today. In some sections of it, you can stop on the modern road and go over to an archaeological site, and it has the Roman road right next to it exposed. And so they're still following a lot of those same regions. Let's see here. You guys have any questions over any of this stuff? Our time has kind of gotten short, so we'll have to throw in some of our plateau pictures next week.
What's this on this map here that I'm looking at? It's got right on the left by the Mediterranean Sea, it's got Way of the Sea. Is that also it?
Way of the Sea is the very edge of that first trade route. And so if you're looking at it on this map, it goes over the river of Egypt, which you can put on your map if you like. You should probably already have it there. And it just tracks the sea edge all the way up and through. And they both join at Damascus with the King's Highway.
Right, but would that not also have been a trade route?
Oh, that is a trade route. The Way of the Sea is a trade route.
Okay, it is.
Yep.
So you had two up there,
Yes, there's two. There's the Way of the Sea and the Way of Shur, which is going through the Negeb or the Negev in some of your translations up through Judea. And the King's Highway is all on the Transjordan Plateau. So the King's Highway is highlighted by a little circle here. It goes up there. So there should be three major trade arteries. Two of them are on the western side of the Jordan. One is on the eastern side of the Jordan. Again, those will become important because we'll see Bible characters, Bible stories, Bible events use these routes. When they talk about going up somewhere, there's only one route they can take, and so they're going to take these routes. So we're going to see how that looks, how that feels, how that functions. Anything else? All right, we'll go ahead and pause right here. The fire hose will slow down of geography as we shift to the history chunks of these things. But keep in mind, the map we're building will help us structure the rest of these stories on top of it. So it's like you're getting all those basic facts again back on the top of your brain so you can interact with them. Thanks, everybody. It was a good conversation in class today.